There we go. And we will just start, if we could, by having our faculty members introduce themselves and introduce their areas of training. And in some cases, we're going to hopefully get back to this, but there are different types of programs where people can receive training in each of these areas. And I hope we get a little bit of differentiation on that at some point. But if we could start with Dr. Tina Williams, would you please, let folks know who you are and what your area is and what that's about?
Hi, yes, I'm Professor Williams, and I'm a neuroscientist in the department, and I've been teaching for many, many years the introductory course, the Biological Basis of Behavior, which is a gateway course to the neuroscience major, but is also one of the core courses in psychology. And so I'll talk tonight a little bit about how to get into programs that are related to neuroscience. Some of you probably are perhaps interested in the field of cognitive neuroscience, which is human neuroscience. But in any case, I'm open to all sorts of questions about graduate school more broadly as well.
Sorry, I'm just going to go across and as I see people. So Dr. Strawman.
So hello, I'm Tim Strawman. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, which is one of the ways that people can get into the sort of applied mental health business. There's more than one way to do it through psychology and several ways to do it in adjacent fields as well. I'll be happy to talk about that.
Thank you. Dr. Craig?
Hello, I'm Maureen Craig. I'm the newest faculty in the social area. So I'm a social psychologist, and social psychologists tend to study how our identities affect our relations with ourselves and other people, and diversity and that kind of stuff. So I'd be happy to talk about social psychology.
And thank you. And Dr. Wilborn.
Hi, I'm Makiba Wilborn, and I am in the developmental area. I have a PhD in developmental psychology, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about the different types of programs. There's applied, there's lifespan, human development, and so there's lots of different ways if you are interested in working in developmental, and developmental is not just solely looking at kids. I know a lot of people think that, if it's really looking at change over time. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit about various ways in which people who are interested in working with kids, but also in looking at change over time, do that in different programs across the country.
Thank you. Well, is there no time like the present, Dr. Wilborn? Do you mind kind of differentiating between those types of programs for people, and then we can go back through?
Sure. So there are, sorry, there was an echo. There are sort of the traditional developmental programs. I mean traditional meaning that sort of kind of like our department, where you have a psychology department and then you have individual areas or groups that specialize in different things, like a developmental group. But then the program I came from at Cornell is a human development program. And so the entire department focuses on developmental questions. But we had people who studied infants. We also had gerontologists. We had sociologists. We had historians. We had people who studied a broad range across the lifespan. Then there are applied development programs. These are programs, often they can be housed in schools of education. Some of the great ones are at NYU, and there's some at, there's one at Boston College. They're great programs where it is giving you sort of the developmental foundation, but also applying that in sort of real world settings. Like some of them do assessments of programs and interventions. And also there are some developmental that are sort of couched in community psych or family studies. So there are human development and family studies. So it really is more focused on your research interests and finding the people who are doing the work you're interested in. And they may be in schools of education, they may be in applied schools, they may be in psych departments, they may be in human ecology or broader or different departments, but it's really sort of their focus and how they go about looking at their questions, not necessarily the specific department they're in.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, would you be willing to differentiate between programs now also?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to echo a little bit of what Makiba has said. Neuroscience is a really, really broad field. And so there are people interested in mostly in behavior, but they want some training in how the brain works and want to use some of the tools of neuroscience like functional imaging or MRI, structural imaging, or electrophysiological work to kind of enhance their work on other behavioral issues, cognitive issues, social issues, things like that. There are other people who study really how cells in the brain work or how molecules in the brain work. And so it really runs the gamut from doing things that are at the very cellular and molecular level, studying cells in a dish, all the way up to human behavior. So because of that, there are different kinds of programs that one can apply to. So just like Dr. Wilburn said, there are neuroscientists like me and like several of the people in our department that are housed in traditional psychology and neuroscience or psychology departments. And we study various aspects of brain and behavior. But these days, there are also many other kinds of neuroscience programs. One of them is a program called an integrative neuroscience program. And this is generally a program that is in a larger university setting and crosses over many departments, sometimes many schools. Sometimes there are faculty from medical schools or business schools or engineering schools, as well as from arts and sciences that are part of this kind of vast array of faculty who you might want to work with. And students who apply to these kinds of integrative neuroscience programs usually have the opportunity to sort of visit and try out several different labs over the first couple of years, and then join a lab sometime during their second year, towards the end of their second year, to do their PhD. In other words, you get a chance to sort of sample some different areas of neuroscience before you end up deciding on the exact area that you want to study. And some students find this very advantageous. Of these programs, some of them are PhD programs in integrative neuroscience, but there are other programs that are what we call admitting programs. We have one here at Duke in cognitive neuroscience, and these are programs that also are very broad in terms of the faculty who are part of the program. Usually you come in and you, again, rotate around several different labs over the first couple of years. But then, depending upon who you end up with as a mentor, if they are in a psychology department, you then have to fulfill the requirements for the PhD in that program. If you end up in a neurobiology department, your mentor is in a neurobiology department in the medical center, then you have to fulfill the requirements for a neurobiology degree in the medical center. So these are not PhD programs per se, they're admitting programs in an area, and then you join a department and a program sometime usually during your second year of graduate school. So again, there are many different ways. And I think one of the sort of take-home messages to everything that I've just said is that it's really important to have a sense of what it is that you're interested in neuroscience and how you'd like to apply these techniques, these levels of analysis before you apply to graduate school. And even more so, it's important to have a really good sense, I'm sure you'll hear this from other people, a really good sense of what is it that you're interested in? Are you interested in studying human cognition and the brain? Or are you interested in studying how neurons develop and join other neurons to produce complex systems? these are different topics, and you need to find faculty who work on these different topics and apply to schools that have faculty that work specifically in the areas that you're interested. Happy to take lots of questions because there are lots of ins and outs to these programs.
Thank you. And just a couple more questions, if I could be kind of get these things kind of out of the way so that we can start allowing for more student questions. And Dr. Strauman, do you mind talking a little bit about different programs that get somebody into practice?
Sure. So clinical psychology is a branch of psychology. It originated as you got a PhD in psychology and you specialized in studying things that had to do with health, mental health, intervention, prevention, things like that. It has expanded into a second kind of degree called a PsyD, a Doctor of Psychology degree, which is not a PhD, so it's typically not research-based. It's kind of meant to be more like a medical school model where you are essentially learning to be a practitioner. And of course, there are other disciplines as well. Nursing, psychiatry, social work as examples, where people also function as sort of in the mental health domain, generally doing interventions, being therapists, things like that. So part of the question about whether you want to do clinical psychology is, do you want to be a therapist, a practitioner? And if so, considering the various routes that you might take to do that, some of which require doctoral level training, 5 or 6 or 7 years, some of which don't. And also thinking about what you see your professional role or roles as. If you want to be exclusively a practitioner, then some of those other disciplines are probably quicker and more expedient routes to get there. If you see yourself as wanting to be somebody whose activities are partly like what other psychologists do, generate knowledge, teach, do research, then you're probably going to want to have a PhD as well. So there's a lot of variability in what people want when they go into clinical psychology. The overwhelming majority of people who do really want to be practitioners, but the PhD allows you to be able to do a lot of other things as well. I'm in the relative minority of people who I like everything that's involved in the job. I mean, most of what I do is research and teaching, but I am a licensed clinician. We worked on therapy. Dr. Veith and I worked together to develop a therapy. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and it really depends on what you see your professional role as. So if you have questions about it, I'd be happy to, in a very non-prejudiced way, talk about all of the different pathways that you might contemplate.
Thanks. So I don't know if there's any other program type in social, Dr. Craig.
Well, so actually there is a social psychology and sociology, which it's generally the same topics, but a difference in methodologies, where in psychology, we tend to do experiments, and in sociology, they look at big data sets and more correlational methods. The other kind of potential program people might look into if they're interested in the type of topics that social psych looks at, like stereotyping and prejudice, the self, identity, self-regulation, and so on. There are social psychologists in business schools, predominantly in management or organizational behavior programs. And so there are folks who are doing just basic social psychology research in a management or organizational behavior program. And so that would be something, if you're reading through papers and you just really love this paper by some person in a business school, it could be worth applying to them because they could give you the kind of training that you might be looking for.
Thanks. Well, I think we're at the point where I can lob just kind of a big question, and then other attendees, I hope you feel like you can ask some questions, either raise a hand or put a question in the chat. But I guess one thing that's probably on the minds of many of the attendees is, how do you make how do you get started in thinking about graduate school? And then a little bit later, how do you make your application a strong one that's going to get the attention of people like our faculty?
Well, I started answering that question a little bit, and I think I could continue a little bit on that line, which is essentially, I think there are two things that are really important. One is that you take the time, and that might mean taking some time after you graduate to figure out, number one, what is it that you're interested in exactly? Not necessarily all of the specificity of the topic, but the general area. Are you really interested in? What kinds of questions are you interested in answering? If in fact you want to be a researcher. Clinical is another kind of issue, but there still are topics and types of clinical that you have to make some decisions about. And I think taking the time to figure that out before you apply is really important, because graduate school, PhD programs, other programs are not like being an undergraduate. It's not that you take 4 or 5 courses a semester and eventually end up with a degree. Right from the very beginning, people are going to ask you what you're interested in. They're going to ask you what questions you want to study. They're going to assume that you have some knowledge about what it is in the field that you're particularly excited about. So I think it's really important that you take the time to do that. The second is that once you've figured out what it is you're interested in, the second part of thinking about applying is to not necessarily just go to the big name schools that you might have gone to when you were applying to being an undergraduate. You might have just looked at, Cornell and Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Stanford. Those might be good places to also look at. I'm not rejecting them. But what is important in graduate school is that you find some researchers who are working on topics that you find interesting, and apply to schools where those people work. And some of those are big state schools like the University of Virginia or the University of Michigan. They're University of California system, lots of University of Texas systems. There are a lot of good people out there who are not at Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Cornell. I'm not saying that there aren't also good people in those programs, so there are, but it's really, really important to find the labs, to find the people, the researchers, and the research that you are most interested in. So I'll let other people jump in and add to what I had to say.
I can jump in and co-sign that. And it's particularly important to identify what your research interests are and who the potential advisors are that are the best fit within social, because we tend to have more of an apprenticeship model where you get admitted to a program to work with a particular person. And so the research statement should be directed towards an audience of a couple people within the program who you might want to work with, because they would tend to have the most power in, determining whether or not it's a good fit. And so it makes identifying this research fit really crucial even before applying.
I often hesitate because most of the time they all want to know about clinical. So I was like, Tim. And I'm the developmental folk. So I always get a lot of students who thought they were going to do clinical, and then they end up being more inclined to go developmental. Development also has some, ties to policy, and there's lots of different ways in which you can do it. I want to completely echo what Dr. Williams and Dr. Craig were saying about the strategy that you're using to pick your grad school is incredibly different than the strategy you used to pick undergrad. And in fact, on most grad applications, they'll ask you, what other schools are you applying to? And the reason why that is, I study gesture. And so I would expect someone who wants to come and do work on gesture, there's a few handful of people who I know are also studying gesture. And if I see University of, Chicago, University of Delaware, whatever, then I know that you have sort of a broader understanding of the field and you really have done your work. If you just put Harvard, Yale, whatever, and I'm thinking, I don't think anyone does like child language at 1 or 2 schools, that tells us your socialization, how well prepared you are to make that shift from what are the metrics that are used in undergrad to what are the metrics that are required for success in grad school. And they're very different. One of the leading scholars in my area is at the University of Delaware. And I mean, she's a big deal, was an advisor to President Obama. And that is what matters. So picking someone who you're excited about their work. The other thing is, just like Dr. Craig said, try to pick a place that there's a couple people, at least 2, that kind of together would be great for you, because people move, people leave, or you go and it's not a great fit. But you're really putting a lot on having one person at an entire school who is going to be responsible for helping you navigate and is the only person per se that can help guide you in your area. So finding people, they don't have to be exact, but there's enough blending, a sort of cohort of faculty. And we also look at that in your statement. So if you put down Tina and me, good luck, right? Like, I could probably make some connection, but that also tells us that you haven't really done the work in the department or in the area of the school to know who would be a great sort of committee who could help get you to the next place or help, develop your interests. So those are the big important things, is really taking the time to do the research ahead of time. I mean, hours worth of checking out. And the best bet is to look at an article, read a couple papers that you really are excited about. Look at who they're citing, and you'll notice if you're in a particular area, you're going to see similar, you're going to see Dr. Craig's name a lot. If you're in, an area looking at, these sorts of phenomena, then look at where those people are. So when Dr. Craig publishes a paper and you read her paper and she cites 4 other people who are also, studies that have done. So that's a great way of finding people who are doing work that's related. If they're citing each other and then finding out where they are, looking at their labs and looking at what research they're doing and seeing if it's aligned with what you're interested in. That's probably the best strategy, as opposed to just sitting down and trying to Google schools and programs and then find faculty. I would do it the other way. Look through articles, find faculty, then go to those schools.
I just to jump in here, one thing that I'm sure we all have in common, and I think for me, this is really a take-home message, is we can't imagine doing anything else professionally. And some of us have been doing this for a long time and still just can't imagine doing anything else. It's that important to us. It's that enjoyable. It's that satisfying. Graduate training in psychology really requires that. It's not a job. It has to be a passion, because it's hard work, and you're expected to be part of a professional community, and you're expected to be contributing knowledge right away, right from the start. And I promise you, you'll know when you talk to people who are potential mentors, who are the ones who that's just what they wake up to do every day. And some of them will say, you know what? It's like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. And they're not kidding. They're not kidding. They have found what it is they really want. So it's up to you to do the kind of exploring that Dr. Williams and Dr. Wilborn and Dr. Craig are talking about, and find out what your passion is, and find out who's doing that. Where they are is not nearly as important as what are they doing, and is it something you could see doing for 10 or 15 or 20 years? Is it something you have some idea about that maybe nobody else has thought about yet, or you can't wait to get to it? If you're finding yourself having that kind of reaction, then you're going to be properly motivated to do the hard work to go through the application process. But I promise you, no matter what area of psychology you're going into, you want it to be that I can't imagine doing anything else with my life.
If I can chime in here, I'm wondering what you all value when you're looking at applications, aside from seeing statements that seem to understand what areas, you're involved in, the kind of research that you're doing, express enthusiasm. Do you give a lot of, do you look at gap years as favorable things? Do you look at, what other kinds of things do you like seeing on people's vitas?
Well, again, I'll jump in first. I think that Makiba mentioned a number of things that we do think are important, which is we do look to see if this person in their statement, their personal statement, and also in the other schools that they've applied to, whether or not they seem a good fit with our program, and particularly in the kind of research that we do in our lab. So that's one thing that we look at. The second thing I would say, I would also say, looking to some extent at the courses students have taken. Certainly, we're interested to see whether or not they've, explored the kinds of courses that we would expect them to have some background in for our line of research. If you're applying to a developmental program and you've never taken developmental, if you're applying to a program where the brain is important and you've basically taken one intro course in the brain, that might not really be sufficient. But I think these days, in part because, and maybe many of you don't know this, is that we don't take very many graduate students, unlike undergraduates that take, 500, 700 students a year. Most graduate programs take very, very few students each year in each particular area. So it's not as if you are, we may not get vast numbers of applications, but we also take very few students. And we're looking for students who are a really good fit. And how do you become a good fit? Well, one is these background things. And the second is some skills. So we look to see if you've had research experience. And that's probably the number one thing we look for. And I would say there are two reasons for that. One is we want to make sure that the students that we take in our graduate program are students who know what research is all about and know the excitement of research, but also the tedium of research and the meticulousness of research. We want them to have as much research experience as possible because we want them to have done it and love it. And we don't want to take a chance on a student who hasn't really done much research or has only done it as one independent study one semester in college, because that isn't very convincing that we think that what research and being a researcher is all about. So many of the students in our program these days have taken several years after being an undergraduate and have worked full-time in the lab as a research coordinator for a research project. There are many programs at other institutions that take students for a year or two, but they're paid jobs that you can get as a research associate in someone's lab. And these kinds of experiences really, really tell us that what being in a lab is all about. And it really increases your chance of getting into a good program, of having a year or two of research experience post-grad. So I wouldn't really call it a gap year as much as an opportunity to find out whether being a researcher and doing research full-time is something that you are passionate about, and are excited about and are interested in doing for many years to come. And the more you've done that. So above and beyond that, the other things I think I look for certainly in neuroscience programs is having some skills like being able to program computers, doing computer programming, statistics, having worked in a lab and learning some laboratory skills. Having these kinds of things are really helpful in upping your chances of getting into a good program.
I wanted to definitely agree with Tina that coming from a school like Duke, there is going to be an inherent expectation that you have done research because of the way Duke is sort of set up. Undergraduate research experience or some kind of, sort of research activity is sort of viewed as a given. And at a school like Duke, if you came from I went to a huge state school. I think there were like 15,000 of us. Like that was a very different perspective. So one, definitely getting involved in research as an undergrad is essential. especially if you are aspiring to go on to a graduate program like the one at Duke. There are lots of different programs. I also want to highlight, and this is, I think, an important distinction that doesn't often get made, is that there's a difference between someone who loves research and someone who has an area that they love and want to research. There's the difference. And so, you know, I did a master's, so I was not a Duke type student at all. I went to state schools, and I went to a junior college, and then I did a master's, and I took a long time to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. I loved doing research early on. It's like a puzzle. It's like a fun Sudoku. Like there's this, the most incredible, experimental methodologies are fun. But in the process, I fell in love with an area and I got fascinated. It was the things I thought about and I would argue with my friends about, or when I would hang out with kids and I would watch those things. So there's a difference between liking research and being good at it. And hopefully those two things can go together. But I want to highlight, it's okay if they don't. So there are lots of great programs and master's programs, and there are lots of non-academic positions where you can get a PhD, but you don't have to necessarily go in to an academic environment, have a program of research, and, so it's okay if you like research and want to continue it, but you're not sure if you want to go on and have a program of research and go a faculty route. And it might happen, but I also want to highlight that after I finished my master's, I could have gotten hired at a lot of really cool research think tanks and places. I could have made a good living doing research on like some cool topics. They have some stuff in DC in education, and I could have. I chose this route because I literally wake up thinking about the questions I love, people gesturing and babies. And that passion that Dr. Strawman mentioned is that the worst thing ever in this profession is if you have to research and spend all of your time thinking about something you're not passionate about. Like there's nothing worse. I can't even imagine like writing a grant, getting it, and not actually liking the work. Like that's actually like the worst. I'd rather have it not get accepted than to get the money and then have to spend the next 3 years doing something that you're not excited about. So the key right now at this level is to really kind of probe your passion, probe what's exciting for you, probe what you think about, and also acquire this research tool belt to help you. But know that, at the end of the day, there's lots of ways you can be in and do research and make a living that isn't just being a faculty and having a program of research at a university.
Yeah, and I'll build on that because it's a common thing that I'll talk with students about, is trying to figure out how to identify what is your research area that you're actually passionate about. Because usually what happens is that if you're interested in grad school, you're probably curious and excited about a lot of different things. And so one way you might think about it is that there's some research and research questions that like you're excited to learn about it. You'll read the papers, it's always really interesting. But then there's some topics where you have some question, and if you're not the one who's gonna find that out first, like that would be a bummer. And so you have to figure out which questions are the ones that you really want to be the person who's advancing this. You can't wait for somebody else to do it. Like you have to do it. And so those will be the types of questions that are hitting at that sense of passion, and find the people who are doing similar work.
I hope the people in attendance feel free to put questions in the chat. The big empty chat box there. But if I could ask our faculty members, I don't know if you would be willing to speak a little bit to students getting grants on their way to grad school. It might be good for students to hear a little bit about options like that and what it does to them in terms of their candidacy.
I would say there are a lot of things that at a university like Duke are possibilities, maybe at other universities are not quite so easy to do because Duke has so many resources available. to me, what I want to see on an application is wherever a student has already been, have they taken advantage of whatever opportunities were there? Have they been resourceful? Have they, if they had the opportunity to do independent studies, did they do it? If they had the opportunity to, take courses from people who were true experts in particular areas, did they do that? Or did they basically just sort of say, well, I'll sort of pick and choose a little bit of this and a little bit of that? Did people challenge themselves? Did you take the tough courses? Did you surprise yourself? Did you say, I had no idea that I was going to find it interesting and rewarding to learn anything about the brain? And I did. And who would have ever imagined, right? So a lot of those things, it's taking advantage of opportunities if they're there. And, if you can get some kind of research funding to explore a study, generally that's something that would happen with a faculty mentor anyway. But certainly challenging yourself, and wherever you are, taking advantage of whatever resources are there. They may be out in the community. Duke is a place, for example, where there are smart faculty members all over campus who don't have easy access to working with super talented undergraduate students, and they love to do that. And it's a great way to get research experience, but you have to be willing to, look outside and sort of comb the campus and say, who's doing really interesting work on X? And you might ask, your professor, you might ask your advisor, you might ask other people, and they'll steer you in those directions. So some of it is really being resourceful, and that's where the motivation and the passion comes in, and be willing to be surprised. I am much more interested in somebody who had a broad exposure to different kinds of research questions than I am somebody who, zeroed in on a specific topic right away. Not that either one of them is bad inherently, but I'm always impressed by somebody who says, I didn't know if I was going to like working with infants. It turned out I loved working with infants. I'm not going to do it, but I really enjoyed my experience, and it really helped me in this way. I think terrific, absolutely terrific.
Angie, I don't know if this is off topic, but is it okay if we talk about sort of letters of rec? Or do you want to hold off on that?
That would be wonderful, but if we could get to a question that's in the chat, we've had a couple, or one roll in, which is finding that specialty, basically. How would you recommend that students locate that topic or topics that they do feel passionate about?
Do a lot
There's
of,
a couple.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that doing some selective exploring. So when you take a course, figure out what it is about the course in psychology that you found particularly exciting. And then one of the best ways is to talk to your professor and say, hey, I found this particular topic in your class interesting. What would you suggest about ways that I might be able to explore this in other directions? How do I take this in other ways? And use that as a stepping stone. It's always great to start with being interested in something. It may not end up being your passion. You may find other things, but to start exploring from a point of interest, and not just, I'm going to take this class and then this class and this class and this class and this class in kind of a random walk fashion, but rather, selectively follow your nose, what was interesting in this class, and then move that on to another class that's a little bit different, might be a related area, and see what then is really interesting in that class. And maybe that will make you back up and say, yeah, that's not the direction I want to go in. And then allow that to direct you in different kinds of ways. I also always recommend go to talks, go to hear different people speaking. There are always talks going on around campus in the Department of Psychology and the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, all kinds of people who are doing various kinds of psychology over in the medical center, the business school, all over the place. And listening to people talk sometimes gets you excited about a topic.
The other thing you could do is depending on which area, go to a faculty member and, who does close enough research that, you can squint and get there, and ask them what the top journals are in their field. And then you can actually get the table of contents for the journal delivered to your email every month. And then just look through the titles and read papers that sound interesting, and just like follow your nose, exactly like that. Just follow the trail on things that seem interesting, and eventually you'll kind of circle around certain topics or researchers that you gravitate towards, and that's a pretty good hint that that's kind of the topic, is the one that you keep coming back to.
Yeah. No,
it-
go.
I was going to say, expect this process to take time. It takes time. When I was an undergraduate, if people asked me what I want to study, I said, mind-body stuff. And I couldn't have been any more articulate than that. I just love, how does the mind affect the body, right? Which is a perfectly reasonable question, but probably not formulated. And it took years and meeting different people. And actually, I apprenticed with a social psychologist who had a wonderful experimental technology for asking that question in a particular way. And I am still using that technology today. And it completely changed it. And in a sense, it didn't change anything, right? It was still, it was what I wanted to do, but it was the tool that I needed conceptually to be able to do the work that I want to do. Expect this process to take time. It's a maturation, it's an evolution, and it's okay to go into it a little on the naive side, because we all did. But keep asking questions. You are surrounded by some very smart people. Go to their talks, take their classes, read their papers.
Yeah, I want to concur. I also want to highlight you have to have a level of meta awareness. So think about when there's a class and there's a topic or discussion. What are the things that you like tell your roommate about? So if your parents called you and said, "What did you learn in class today?" What is the first thing you come up with? I'm laughing because I now have a freshman in college, and I see myself doing that. And like, what would you guys talk about today? And the first thing that comes out, oh my God, my professor talked about this study, or da-da-da. That's, keep track of that. Keep track of the things that when you leave the class, you're like thinking about, or when you're reading in a textbook and you highlight and you circle, or you're like, yeah, that reminds me of my Uncle Joe or whatever. That's helpful. So what are the things that you will argue to the, sort of fight over when, on the weekends with your roommates, and you're like, no, that's not true. What are some of your soapboxes? What are things that like you see on the media that piss you off, or that you're like, that's wrong? That's a good cue as to like what matters to you, what your values are, what's exciting for you. And that's how you start kind of figuring it out. It's the thing you keep going back to, the thing that you keep being drawn to. Those are good cues. The key is this: graduate school doesn't teach you what to think, it teaches you how. So we don't tell you what to want to do or what to study. We teach how to acquire the skills and get what you need. But the what has to come from you. And that's the hardest part. Undergrad, we give you lots of what. Grad school is lots of how. And that's the difference. That's important for you guys to think about when you're trying to make decisions.
Thanks for all that. That's great. Great guidance, great suggestions. And if you don't mind, if we could go back and spend a little bit of time talking about letters of rec, since you brought that up, Dr. Wilborn. I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, this is really important. Getting a letter from a teacher, and this is important, especially coming from a school like Duke. Getting a letter from a teacher that says you got an A in the class, you showed up on time, you were really motivated, you asked great questions, and what? Like, I want you to recognize that that's just not enough, because most of you're at Duke, one of the top 10 schools in the country. Like, of course you guys are going to be on top of things. The key is a lot of mistakes applicants make is that they don't have letter writers who really know them. They have letter writers like they don't even know who to necessarily ask. So if you are in your second semester of your junior year and you don't even know who you would ask, you better start flunching. You need to start having conversations. So this is why research is a great. I've sent students on to study psychopaths, literally, and like they worked in a baby lab, which I don't know if they had much experience. Those little kids can be mean sometimes, but the truth is they weren't getting real like applied experience in my lab. But they took those and they took it to a lab or where they really wanted to study. The point is they spent time where I could talk about their growth, their change, how they approached failure. The most beautiful thing about research is it teaches us how to fail a lot. And I want you guys to recognize, my colleagues are going to laugh at this. This is a profession where you're excited when you get rejected and they tell you, ooh, you can send it back and we might reject you again. We're like, woo, we will literally celebrate when you get an article rejected. They're like, you can send it back. Maybe we'll take it. Maybe we won't. We think that's success. So there's tons of failure, and like we celebrate failure because you rarely, if ever, get in a straight out acceptance. I mean, I know one person who did it ever, and I've been in this for a while. So the reality is that this is a high failure type profession, and research in and of itself, that's why we have piloting, so it doesn't really count. But the truth is we want to make as many mistakes as we can to figure out. So that is an important thing to be able to say about a student in a letter of like how they deal with that. How do they overcome? How do they persist? Where they, sort of, how do they work as a team? If you don't have someone who can talk about those skills, you have a less sort of a less likely chance of being a strong candidate. So having someone who can speak to those sort of analytical, problem solving, creative critical thinking skills, someone who can talk about sort of leadership or your personality, and someone who can also talk about like growth or change or some aspect of you. So your letter writers should all be giving sort of different parts of who you are, and also the depth of a relationship. If it's someone who just writes, you did a good job in a class, it's not enough. And frankly, coming from a Duke, that hurts you because most of the kids who are coming from comparable schools are going to have decent GPAs and showed up on time and did what they were supposed to do.
So Tim, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about clinical programs because we only have about 10 minutes left. And I think many of the students are probably really interested in learning a bit more about the different types of programs and also a little bit more about how to get into clinical programs.
Okay, sure. So in terms of clinical psychology, there are really 3 types of programs. 2 of them are PhDs and 1 is the Doctor of Psychology, PsyD. So there are PhD programs that are highly research oriented. Duke happens to be one of those. And the assumption is if you go there, yes, you want to be credentialed as a clinical psychologist, but you probably don't want to make a living exclusively or even primarily as a practitioner. You're primarily going to be someone who generates knowledge, someone who teaches, someone who supervises. There is another kind of PhD program where the goal is really primarily to train practitioners, but along the way, you get a PhD. So you have learned a set of research skills, had to do a dissertation, things like that. But the assumption is that most of the people who graduate from that program are going to go on and do some kind of applied work. And then there are the PsyD programs, which I will simply say about them that they vary enormously in quality. A number of them are for-profit institutions, which I should give you some pause. But there also are absolutely terrific PsyD programs, and it's actually a model that I have a lot of admiration for, because if what you want is to be a practitioner, then those can be places where you'll really do well. It is statistically ridiculously competitive, but I am convinced that part of that is because more than half of the people who apply are simply not prepared to apply and don't really have a compelling reason why they're applying to a particular place. So we this year will get 300 applications for our clinical psychology program. I think we have 4 faculty who are looking for a student, right? That's crazy. Of those 300 people, maybe 50 are qualified in the sense of they've really done their homework and they know what it takes and they know who's at Duke and they know who that might be a good match for. So the odds are immediately different if you've done your homework. And one other point I want to make is very few people get accepted the first time through. It's just that competitive. I applied 3 different times, never got an interview. The 4th time I got interviewed at one place, and thank goodness they accepted me. It is competitive. That's why it needs to be your passion. But everything that Dr. Wilborn said about recommendation letters is absolutely true. People want to know across the board, what are your qualifications? You don't get points for coming right out of an undergraduate program. You don't get less qualified by taking a couple of years and exploring and digging into a lab and doing research or doing something that's policy relevant. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Taking that additional time and exploring it, I think it's an opportunity for growth, and it's also an opportunity for people can get to know you so they can write the kind of letter that says, I know this person, and I can tell you that they are going to be successful as your graduate student. That's what we want to see in a letter.
I also want to mention that graduate schools also require students to write an essay about themselves and about their interest in graduate school. And this is I just want to let you know that this is a different kind of essay than the one that you wrote to get into Duke. Again, graduate schools are not looking for a clever little story about what happened to you in kindergarten. They are looking for information about your experiences that led you to think that this is what you want to do, to develop your passion for this area of research, and for some information about perhaps things that they can't see otherwise on your application in terms of the growth that you that you felt that you developed through your experiences in a lab, through insight that you had in a course, through insight that you gained through a job or through volunteer opportunities, things like that. Those are the kinds of things. It's a bit more like thinking about applying for a job where you know what they're looking for, and what you want to do is present yourself, not lying, but present yourself and make yourself a great candidate, and tell them why you're a great candidate for their particular program and for the researchers that you're interested in working with.
One last thing about statements, if I can weigh in, is don't try to hide blemishes. So if you have a bad semester, either have, like, if you have an academic advisor as one of your letter writers, and I do this often for my advisees, I will sort of speak to, this was a particularly difficult year. I will not give personal details, but this is not at all a reflection of who this student is, right? So if you can have a letter writer, and it's okay to ask letter writers if they can speak to specific things. But if you do have, let's say, a bad semester, students often will put the entire sob story, or they will completely ignore it. And to me, you got to find a balance. You can turn your adversity and make it into strength and resilience. And I love those. You know, you can say in general, this was a really difficult semester. There were family issues that went on, and it was very difficult. As you can see, that this affected my GPA. However, I now find this to be a semester I'm incredibly proud of, because I got through it and it reaffirmed for me that I really want to do X. And because of that, I know now that I can persist and overcome things that are thrown at me. So do you see how you can address it, but you're empowered by it? And that's a style and a finesse, but I think it's really important, because trying to get someone to sort of feel sorry for you is not a school. If they let you in for that, you don't want to go. But also pretending like, from the time I was 4, I always knew what I wanted to do. And I've been passionate since I could speak. Like, no, that's not true either. But finding a balance about being honest, like, hey, my freshman year, I really struggled. It was difficult for me, but I learned a lot about myself. And I'm even more convinced now that I have not only what it takes, but it reaffirmed for me that this is really what I want. So make sure in your statements that you're finding a balance between sort of highlighting the things you want to highlight, but also harnessing the things that you may want to shy away from, but also not spending too much time focusing on all the horrible negative things. And given that you guys are COVID kids, you all had a lot of really crappy things dealt to you. So how can those experiences be used to highlight how you got where you are now in your thinking and your desires and your passions and your goals?
Thank you so much for speaking to so many important issues. And I think you've really addressed a lot of things that are on people's minds, faculty members, and now you are free to go. Can I thank you so much for giving an hour of your night to questions and issues around grad school application. So grateful for you. And if it's all right, may I volunteer that you would be happy to be contacted for follow-up information?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you
Sure.
so much. And
Best of luck.
thanks. So we're going to be transitioning now. We've had a couple of our current graduate students enter the room, and over the next few minutes, I expect a few more faces to come. So we're going to just halt for a second and give people time to make this transition. And then we'll come back in maybe like 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, let's get rolling. Thank you for joining us, current Duke graduate students in PNN. So great to have you here. And I think we have one more panelist maybe who will be on their way. But if we could start this off by just having each of you introduce yourself, say, basically whose lab you're in, what kind of work you're doing, when you got to Duke, that would be a great way to start. Matthew, you're first in line on my screen. Do you mind starting?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm a 4th year in the cognitive area. I work with Simon Davis and Jenny Groh. I think I can do my research topic in one sentence. I use brain stimulation and use research how to improve memory in people with early stage Alzheimer's. I can't remember what else you prompted us to say, but I mean, that's a good intro, right?
Yeah, I think you hit it. You got your training area,
Cool.
You got your lab, you got your topic, and when you started. So that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol. I am also a 4th year. I am actually Dr. Strauman's student who was just here. I am in the clinical psychology program, and my research interests are focused on self-regulation and emotion regulation of adolescents, using both questionnaires and neuroimaging techniques to get that done.
Thank you. Skylar.
Hi, everyone. I'm Skylar. I'm a 1st year grad student in the social psychology program, and I'm working in Jim Shaw's lab and also working with Rick Hoyle. My research focuses on how people adapt to stressors, particularly mistakes while they're in goal pursuit and those failure points, and how people perceive those stressors and adapt afterward, as well as motivation control beliefs.
Thanks. Carissa?
Hi, everyone. I am also a 1st year in the Systems and Integrative Neuroscience program. I am currently working with Dr. Jenna McHenry and my research focuses on social behavior and the underlying neural circuitry regulating social motivation and homeostasis.
Thanks. And Daniel.
He's
Muted.
muted. Sorry. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a third year student. I'm in the cognition in the brain area, working with Kevin Labar and Greg Samanas Larkin. In general, I do research on emotion and decision making with a bit of computational modeling and neuroimaging. And right now, I'm studying ways in which valuation processes impact emotional experience.
Thanks for providing brief introductions. And I think one good way to kick things off is to remind people that please put questions into the chat or raise your hand. We would love this to, be an active panel. But in the meantime, if I could ask each of our panelists to talk, if you wouldn't mind charting your course basically to where you are now, because I think there's probably a lot of variety and it's good for people to know about it. Matthew, can we start with you again?
Sure. I was an undergrad at Duke. I've been in a couple different grad programs that I either mastered out of or, things like that before doing this current program. I studied philosophy and cell molecular biology, and before this, I worked for a couple of years, and I did a master's in music where I got involved in like music cognition research, and that's sort of how I finally ended up doing my current thing. So yeah, some academic stuff, some work that had nothing to do with academics, so kind of a mixture of the two.
Thanks. Carol, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say I have a pretty staple clinical psych trajectory. I went to Hopkins for undergrad and I started off pre-med, as we all do at Hopkins. And then right around my sophomore year, I started to get involved with research in the developmental lab, started really liking that, got connected with a professor who went to Duke for her PhD, and she was a clinical psychologist. Ended up getting involved in her research, which was around coping skills and coping styles of young adults. Got really interested in that, dropped out of pre-med, went hard into trying to get research experience to go to grad school, applied to grad school right out of undergrad, didn't get in. I applied to Duke actually, and I didn't get in. I didn't even get an interview. Spent 2 years at Mass General doing research there, their imaging center. So I applied again, about a year and a half into that full-time research position. That's where I got the bulk of my imaging experience. Applied a second time, got a lot more interviews that went much better, and got into Duke, and the rest is history.
Thanks. Skylar.
So after high school, I got really sick, and so couldn't go to college for a while. Worked in food service and managing employees for about 7 years. Then as soon as my health improved, went to a little community college in Arizona. While I was there, I was fortunate enough to just get taken under the wings of an incredible professor and started doing research at a community college. Then once I finished up there, did neuroscience and cognitive science at the University of Arizona, and applied for grad school. Similar to Carol, I didn't get a single interview the first year. Applied 8 places, and applied to the NSF and Ford Fellowship, which I really recommend doing. It was a wonderful experience. So then that year after graduating, worked in the lab that I was in as an undergrad as a kind of project manager there, while getting ready to apply again. Applied again last fall, and actually those interviews didn't go through either. But after everything fell through, I won the NSF fellowship and was able to go back to schools that turned me down originally, and so that was like a leveraging tool that I was able to use. And Duke ended up, after interviewing, being the one that was just a wonderful, easy choice to be like, oh, of course I'll go here. So that's how I ended up here.
Thanks, and I'm sure I'm going to be tapping you to talk a little bit more about NSF and Ford Foundation, opportunities. I actually tried to kind of rook the faculty into that, and they didn't bite it. So if I could have one of you address that, that'd be wonderful. But in the meantime, Carissa, could we hear about your kind of how you got to where you are?
Yeah, of course. So I went to undergrad at University of Florida, and I originally started as an engineer, funny enough, and I switched to psychology for my major. Turns out I love it, and now I'm here. I started working in a lab that focuses on midbrain dopamine regulation, specifically in disorders like Parkinson's disease. And I applied for grad school immediately out of undergrad. Didn't get any interviews, so there's a common theme. So I decided to stay a year at University of Florida doing that research, and then I did a year at research at Columbia University as a research tech, focusing on circuitry for reward and motivation. And I applied again and got a couple interviews, and now I'm here.
Thanks. Daniel.
Yes, this is going to probably sound like a familiar trajectory, but I went to undergrad actually at a very small liberal arts school, which sort of is like a feeder school to PhD programs. A lot of us applied to them out of there. Yeah, I applied to several places, didn't get in anywhere. The reason they all told me was because I didn't have laboratory experience, but who really knows? So I spent a couple of years then working as a sort of research coordinator position in a cognitive neuroscience lab, sort of doing standard tasks, and applied again. And yeah, had better luck the next time and decided to come to Duke. But I also felt a little cheated that I hadn't applied for the NSF up to that point. No one had told me that it was a great idea to do that before grad school. So I guess I'll put in another plug for considering doing that.
Thank you for sharing kind of your experiences, finding your way to where you are. Do you all mind talking a little bit about NSF? Because I know this is something that, can be a game changer.
I just want to pipe in and say that when I was in undergrad, people told me to not even bother applying for the NSF because it was so competitive that there was just no way that I would get it. And then I got it my second year grad school. So there's hope. Don't listen to people, do it anyways.
Skylar, do you mind?
Yeah, applying for the NSF when you're an undergrad is a free shot. I did it twice, once while I was an undergrad and then once before getting into grad school here. None of those counted. If I didn't get in both times, I still could have applied again this year or next year while I was a grad student. And I think the best thing about it is it's so parallel to your personal statements and your research focused stuff that you're using for your applications anyway, that it's going to give you a lot of good experience writing about yourself and writing about your research in really concise ways. And the feedback I got from the first time I applied was critical to getting it the second time. So either way, you win from the experience. I think the best thing that I did while I was going through grad school applications and the NSF was getting someone who was not in my field, who I trusted, someone in my cohort, basically, that we applied together, we wrote together, we gave each other feedback over and over and over again. So you're not just getting a couple instances of feedback, you're getting constant, blunt and kind feedback on your writing.
Thanks for providing that information. I don't know if it's how widespread the knowledge is that you can apply for grants before you get into grad school, and that it can up your chances and make you a more attractive candidate, essentially. What are some other things that you would recommend for students who are pretty seriously considering grad school? some lessons that you've learned or good advice that you would want to pass along?
I'd make sure to work as an RA first, maybe more than 1 year, more than one lab. It feels like there's a rush, but there really isn't. It's the best and only way to figure out the sort of topic you like, the methods you like, the community you like, because every subfield has its own culture. And when you're an RA, there's grunt work, but there's also opportunities to take charge of things. And it's a lot lower stakes in a way, because, you finish one, you get another. So that's the best way to go.
I would like to continue off of that. So I applied for graduate school when I got out from undergrad, and I didn't get any interviews, as has been said. And looking back on it now, I am actually really glad I didn't get any interviews, so I could be a research technician at University of Florida and at Columbia, because I've like doubled my technical skills and doubled my research knowledge from 4 years of undergrad to like 2 years of research. I mean, I do highly recommend it. If you want to go to graduate school, of course apply, but it's not the worst thing in the world if you don't get interviews. Research tech is an amazing position. You learn so much. And like Matthew said, you get to learn about what exactly you want to do and kind of hone in on that specialty of yours.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think something I didn't understand when I was applying to grad school out of undergrad was that, I guess my feeling was that if I didn't get into grad school right away, I'd sort of be behind, or I'd have to wait 2 years. But having had those 2 years of experience, I actually feel like I'm ahead, because now I have I had time to develop skills that people who are the same year as me in grad school didn't have time to develop. So I think just understanding that a lot of the time you're evaluated by where you are in your career more so than your calendar age. And so in a way, you're getting a head start by waiting, even though that's counterintuitive. The other thing which someone told me is that, at least for people going into the cognitive or cognitive neuroscience areas, programming skills are really valuable. I wish I took more programming in undergrad. If I could do it over again, I'd probably at least get a minor in computer science. I think everybody I know in the cognitive area does a lot of programming. The reasons being, it's the best way, I'd say, to do data analysis, which is obviously central to psychology research. And it's also the way most experiments get programmed. So it's just a useful skill to have, whether or not you enjoy it.
Can I add one? And I went on this round, but I wanted to add to what Daniel and Chris were saying. When I was in undergrad and kind of post-undergrad, I was so obsessed with like finding the best project or the right project or the one that I'm most, passionate about and everything. You can learn a lot doing something you don't even like. And in fact, I'd almost recommend it. You probably won't find your perfect thing first, or even after many years of, ask a professor if they're working on their most perfect, passionate, probably not. You can learn about, like I said, about the sort of culture of the field, and maybe even culture of different departments. And certainly, like Daniel was just saying, you can, if it's a topic you don't care about, you don't even like, but you learn like quantitative and computational skills, you're way ahead. And when you apply to grad school, it's nice to have like a sort of like unilinear track that's trending toward your ultimate dissertation. But you could say, I spent some time, like someone, an RA who was in my lab and since went to grad school, was like, okay, we're working on aging and we're working on dementia. I learned a lot, and but I really want to work on autism and child development. And she was like, I don't know how they're ever going to look at my CV and think I'm qualified to do this, and just say you're going to do it, right? I have research skills that clearly translate, and this is what I want to do. You might feel like you're being pigeonholed, but if you're acquiring skills, it's the opposite.
Are there other skills that you would advise, any of our panelists would advise that people pick up on their way to applying?
Definitely statistics, because I think my other advice of like things to invest in is trying to get like poster opportunities and publication opportunities. And that doesn't mean like you have to get a first authorship before you're in grad school, but like getting your name on a paper, even if you're like somewhere in the middle of a 25 authorship list, like your name's on it, shows up on Google Scholar, you put it on your CV under publications, that's fantastic. And that's a little bit easier to do if you have a basic understanding of statistics. And Angie teaches a really great course on statistics. So I would say I got permission to take like the first year sequence of the PhD stats courses at Hopkins, and more than anything else, that's what got me a boost in my post-bac when I was doing full-time research, because I was ahead of everybody else because I knew how to run a regression and people hadn't really done that. And so they were like, oh, somebody needs to write a poster. Carol knows how to write and do a regression letter. Like she'll run the stats for people. And then I would get on multiple posters. And that like really helped like beef up my CV. And that's really important for clinical programs, especially if you're wanting to go to a like more research focused clinical program, kind of like Duke. That's going to matter more than any kind of like clinical exposure. It's also really hard to get clinical experience before you're in grad school. So don't fret about clinical experience before you're in grad school. Definitely invest in your research skills.
I don't know if this is a reasonable question, but how did you know you were ready to apply to grad school? Or did you?
When I absolutely hated my post-bac, I knew it was time to go. When I was there for too long and I knew too many things about the bureaucracy of where I worked, I was like, this is it, I'm ready. To be completely cynical about it. No, that's when I started to have ideas of my own and research questions about the material that we were doing and kind of feeling an itch to like do my own thing. That's when I knew that it was for me. And I think at a lot of right around the same time, my friends who decided to not go to grad school and actually got fantastically high paying jobs in industry with the skills that they learned in their research coordinator position were like, oh my gosh, I hate this. Like I hate writing this paper. I hate having to collect this data. I don't really care. You notice it. And that's a really good spot to be in too, because you have amassed fantastic analytical skills by the end of a research coordinator position. And you can get a very nice job in industry with it.
I think another important part of being ready is just being sure you want to make the commitment, wanting to do it badly enough, and just, I guess, being confident enough about how you want your next 5 or 6 years to go that you're willing to do something pretty stressful and challenging and long term and low paying. I feel like occasionally you will see people kind of sign up for a PhD program or get started and suddenly realize, they didn't realize how much they were signing up for. So I guess, yeah, be sure that you're willing to give a lot to it before you make the leap.
Just a reminder to our attendees, please feel free to raise your hand if you have questions or put a question in chat. Panelists would love to address it. I guess another thing in the meantime is just asking about how you, what went into the decision process with coming to a certain mentor?
So, so I'm currently working with Dr. Jenna McHenry, and after interviewing, one of the things that was most important to me was communication. I know a lot of people in graduate school, they kind of just want to be independent. They want to do their own thing. They don't really care about meetings or talking with the PI, anything like that. I'm one of those people that need like weekly meetings that just want to talk, that want to outline everything and figure it all out right then and there. And if there's a problem, I want to communicate that and figure out a solution. So one of the things I did look out for was how, like, I guess, like easily accessible the PI was and how freely am I able to talk with him or her. That was one thing that was huge.
I also think, let's say you're trying to find out what a lab is like or a PI is like. If they get a positive endorsement from the people who are in the lab now, that's your best evidence. Because what happens a lot, certainly at Duke, it's like, well, I heard this person's really difficult to work with and really kind of a pain, but it's Duke, so I'm pretty sure I'll just like, weather it. But that's not something you want to do. If it's not a good, if the PI is, bothering everybody, they're going to bother you too. And no amount of like brand name really is a fair trade for that. So make sure you ask people what the PI is really like, and try to trust what you learn.
Just a couple of things. One, I think another good thing to look at too is see who's graduated from the lab and what they went on to do, and if they're doing the sorts of things that you want to do. So like for me, I wanted to go into academia, so I wanted a lab where a pretty high percentage of people were able to get, say, R1 jobs. And another thing is, I totally agree. It's probably the most important thing to figure out what the advisor's like and what it will be like to work with them, because they kind of control your professional life. But it's also important just to understand generally what people in the lab do. So, I've been in labs before where the advisor was awesome, super helpful, great guy, but he put a lot of demands on his students that made it hard for them to advance their CVs. So try to get sort of a full picture of what it's like to do grad school in that lab and not just what the PI is like.
So we do have a couple questions in chat now. One, Carol, it looks like you're the person who would be answering it. What made you certain that you wanted to get a PhD rather than practice, focused degree?
Yes, excellent question. And perhaps a slightly uninspired answer. A part of it was knowing that I loved research and that I wanted to get training to be able to do research in the future, and that I would have the skills needed to not be just a clinician. Above and beyond that, it was the financial piece of going to a PsyD program versus a PhD program at the doctoral level. So a PhD program pays for me to be here, and I have access to applying to like a fellowship like the NSF, versus at a PsyD program, you're going to be paying for that, and there are very few scholarships, and the price is about the same as going to med school. So in a way, you kind of have to like sign up for the fact that you'll be living with loans for a little while. And so the research part of it is actually a cop out, because there are some great PsyD programs that give you great research training. The biggest thing for me was the financial piece of it and not wanting to take out loans. And that was even a consideration when I was applying to grad school, because I have a limited financial help from my parents. It was like, I had an offer in Miami, but it was like $20,000 a year. And I'm like, I can't live in Miami for $20,000 a year. And that's what all the grad students who were there said. And so that was my consideration. I think for a master's versus a doctoral degree, I don't know. That's a hard one. I think I was kind of steeped in the research, and so a master's program kind of didn't feel like it was going to give me what I wanted. Like, that is a very much a practice-based degree, and I love my research.
Thanks. We also have another question that's just about maintaining connections with mentors from undergrad. Were you all able to do that? How much did you lean on those folks to help you get into grad school? That kind of thing.
I'll take this one too. 100%. Like, I still do research. Like, I'm writing a paper with my mentor from undergrad, and she was instrumental in getting me into grad school. She like walked me through every step of the way, and I don't think I would be here without her. My recommenders were either my supervisor for my postbac position, my mentor from undergrad, who knew me from a research point as well, and as a student, And then my third recommender was somebody who knew me on a more clinical level, who was actually my supervisor for a peer listening program that I did in undergrad. So I tried to like round it out with what I knew like grad school I would have to be doing in grad school.
Would anyone else like to? Oh, Carissa, great.
Yeah. So in my undergrad career, I did have like my PI, of course, and then a graduate mentor who, got his doctorate, is now in industry. I was very fortunate enough to have a really great mentor. I still talk to him all the time, and like we send each other memes on Instagram. It's great. But I think that if you do decide to go into a research back position or post back or like a research technician position, make sure to connect with other lab members and connect with the PI. Don't come in, do your work, and then leave. It's very good to like maintain relationships. It's very good to establish relationships just because these can go such a long way. For my graduate, I did have recommenders from my undergraduate mentor as well as my post-bac. So I was thankful, I was able to like talk with them. I had dinner with my mentors. I was like listening to their family stories. It was great. It's something I could bring up later and be like, hey, I hope you and your family are doing well. I was kind of hoping you can write me this letter of rec. But it did work out very well. So one thing to take from it is starting early, establish relationships, like really good, friendly, get to know them, make sure they know you, be open.
I have two just sort of little pieces of practical advice that I want to add on to these already pretty complete comments. The first is to keep a record of everything you've done with a given professor. Like maybe you were super engaged in class, or you attended lab meetings, maybe you ran stats in someone's. You just keep a long bullet pointed list of everything you did, because when you ask for a rec letter, you can send that list and then they will translate that into the letter. The thing you never want to do is rely on someone's memory. Even if they like you, even if they actually remember you, they probably don't remember every little thing you did. So you can just, you can sort of guarantee the quality of your rec letter by giving them that scaffold. And the other thing this question reminded me of is the way you communicate with mentors or faculty in general, which is to keep the emails really short and specific. And I've been guilty of the opposite. Like you send them this long, angsty email about all the things you're worried about and considering. And professors are so busy, and really people in general, but especially faculty. So you want to keep it really brief, and like the action item and what you want from them is really clear. It's a good way to respect people's time and to get the most out of them. Then one other piece of this question I don't want to forget is, right, if you've done undergrad and a post-bac and an RA-ship and all this, it's not bad to have like a recommender from each one that covers the time. Unlike a job, no one's really scrutinizing your CV to say, I see there's a 3-month gap. No one's looking that closely. But generally speaking, unless you really screwed up a position, in which case you want to try to hide it, it's best to have a recommender that can sort of cover the spread of your experiences.
It gets a lot easier to know who's going to be your recommender after undergrad, because it's a lot more intuitive and a little bit different from your recommendation letters that you applied to college with. Like I know very few people who like had a professor who they went to lecture a couple times with, like that. Those aren't going to be super strong letters because they can't really speak. They can speak to how you take a class. They can't necessarily speak to your technical abilities. But once you have those 2 years of experience, like your direct supervisor becomes an easy one. But you do a lot of side projects along the way. You collaborate with other labs, and then those either postdocs and their PIs become very easy. Like, oh yeah, like I want those people to say what a great job I did, like running their sub-study with this particular like task that I really, really want my like future PI to know that I can do. It becomes that intuitive. So don't sweat it as much. Yeah.
Oh, what Carol just said reminded me. let's say you're doing an RA shift and you meet the professor, the PI once a month, and you actually work with a grad student or a PI, the person you actually work with can write the letter, then the PI signs it. It's an ethically gray area, but it's a thing that happens. I get this question pretty often. I wouldn't have a grad student write your letter, or I wouldn't have a grad student sign your letter. If the grad student writes it, that's fine. But you know, it's the kind of thing that I think happens, and the other panelists can let me know if this is true in their group as well. But you know, you might hand the PI a written letter that you had a hand in, or the grad student had a hand in. And it's just kind of, so don't think that, don't avoid doing this if that situation applies to you, because it's a thing that happens and it's generally okay.
Another thing to mention, based on something you said a little while ago, Matthew, is that if you're trying to get somebody to write a letter from each stage of what you did, kind of on your way to grad school, you want to make sure you keep in touch with those early people, right? You keep regular contact, you know, every 6 months or a year at least, writing and updating them on what you're doing, and still reiterating that you hope they'll be able to vouch for you later on.
So long as you don't do it in a really needy way that makes big demands on their time.
Should we get the quality of life issues? Are we there yet? The life of a graduate student, what's it like?
Well, I only started 3 months ago, so I don't have near as much experience, but I heavily underestimated the amount of reading I have to do. Not for classes really, but just for research. I need to know like the history of what I'm working on, big impact research papers, what the future might be like. And I mean, I love graduate school, it's amazing. But I definitely underestimated how much note taking and how much research and how much literature I need to like cram in my brain for writing, or for just answering questions out of the blue, or for even coming up with studies that I will or will not do.
This is when I scare everybody out of being a clinical student. As a fourth year, I no longer have time to do what Carissa just described, which is to do a lot of that reading and note taking and writing. I'm writing my notes after my session. I am consulting with my supervisor once a week, and I'm having group supervision for about 2 hours. In addition to that, I see about, well, currently I have a really light load, which is of about 4 patients. Which brings me anxiety because I'm applying to internship soon, and I got to get those hours up, which is something that happens when you're a clinical student. You eventually have to start thinking about internship. I'm also trying to write my dissertation and, you know, propose that. So I think it gets progressively busier, but that being said, I still love it. And every year I feel like I get a little bit closer to doing like exactly what I want to do. So in the same way that it's very busy, and I think the time demand gets consistently greater, I think it does become consistently more rewarding, because you're starting to get a little bit more of a picture of like, what is life going to look like when you're done? And and kind of helps you like negotiate what matters and what doesn't matter long term. And I did not have this feeling or this insight before writing my paper for candidacy. So there's milestones.
Yeah, I think the answer depends a lot on a lot of different factors. I guess exactly what area you have. Like you mentioned, I think clinical students do seem to work a bit more. It depends on what program you go to. I think it depends even more on what lab you're in. So that's another thing to ask around about, is like, how much do you guys work? Is it, you know, a good quality of life with this PI specifically? But I guess maybe just on a positive note, I found that at least at Duke in the cognitive area, it seems like it is kind of up to the student how much they work. If your only goal is just to pass your PhD within 5 or 6 years, I think most students can do that without working 40 hours a week even. But if you have maybe career goals that demand you get a lot done. Like maybe you want to, be faculty at an R1 one day. That tends to require a lot of work just to get your CV to where it needs to be. But yeah, I think that the good news, at least in our program, is that it seems to kind of be up to the person how much of their life they want to commit to it.
I'm also pretty new. Carissa and I are in the same cohort. And I do want to say on the positive side, it's been so cool to just jump in, and I feel like I already have friends. There's like 10 or 12 of us, and we got together right away and became friends and hang out regularly. So that's a really cool part, where I think just because you're all thrown into the same thing together, you naturally just accelerate the friendship process. But it's getting intense. It's pretty busy. I'm the only person in my lab, so I don't have anybody other than my PI that's setting expectations. But I'm the type of person that tends to do more than I should. So I'm really thankful that I had a year off before starting this, because I was really intentional about trying to set some like work-life boundaries. And if I didn't have that, I'd be burning myself out right now. But like keeping at least part of your weekend free is really important, and knowing when to stop, even when you have a whole bunch of stuff that needs done eventually. I think that's something important that as you get into it, even if you have a plan, you might not stick to it all the time, but having something in place as you go into it's gonna at least get you closer to sticking with some quality of life stuff and picking up a hobby or two to keep you not just doing research all the time.
This reminded me that I normally tell people that when you get to grad school, like there's always going to be work that can be done. So if you're ever going to say, I can't do X because I have work to do today, you're never going to do X ever. So I highly encourage like accepting the mindset in grad school that the work's going to be there tomorrow. So go ahead and do X. And recently I heard Dr. Zucker, when I was saying that I was feeling exasperated in clinical practicum earlier this week, say that she now just like laughs when things get super busy, that she's just like comically amused by the whole situation, and she gets done whatever she absolutely has to and whatever she can, and then she just laughs it off. And I'm like, that I haven't hit that yet, but that is now my new work-life balance goal, is to find it amusing.
Yeah, I feel like all of this, we don't want to scare you away from graduate school. It's a really great experience. You just have to be aware of the time commitment there is. And the work-life balance is very important, but it's something that you regulate and not really any of the professors or PIs. So you need to decide when you can work and when you'll have fun. I mean, yes, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of homework and everything, but like Skylar said, we all hung out the other week. I went with trivia with my friends. I mean, go to the movies. There is time. You just have to figure out the best places to place that in your week, if that makes sense.
Everything that's been said really resonates with me. So I don't want to repeat anything because it's all very good and accurate advice. I will say that the best part of grad school would be the flexibility. Unlike other sorts of jobs, you can kind of set your own hours, but it's much easier to say, oh, I'm going to the dentist this morning. Whereas at a company, it would probably just be more red tape to make that happen. Whereas in like a school job, it's not that hard. The worst part would be the grind of it. I also think that, PIs might be excellent scientists, but it doesn't mean that they're good managers or bosses. I think the quality of managers is much higher at like a for-profit company than it is at a school. So you might find that wherever you go, you'll need a lot of patience for you know, what the environment is like. But I think it was something that Daniel may have said, like way at the beginning, is that, you know, you just kind of have to decide to do it and then like not stop doing it. Like basically anyone I know who's finished a PhD sort of hated it toward the end, and you just have to like not stop and then you're done. And Carol and I were in the same cohort, and like I feel like I'm really hitting that truism now as we sort of reach like the last lap. It's like, oh my God, here we go. So, you know,
And
it's
a milestone. It's developmental
yeah,
thing in
yeah,
graduate school. Everyone who I've talked to who has it already, like Matthew said, like has reached that point. I was telling my mentor from undergrad, I'm like, I think I hate this now. And she's like, that means you're almost done. And I'm like, okay, great. Thank you. The other day I was asked what I was passionate about, and I'm like, finishing my PhD. That is my passion. And it's true because I know it's an incredible degree that's going to get me really, really far. And it doesn't take away from how much work it is. But you know, I think especially true for folks looking into clinical, like a clinical PhD is hard to get in. It's a lot of work. And you got a lot of demands on your time. But like once you have that clinical psychology PhD title, like there's a lot that you can do as a professional that other degrees don't let you. There's a lot of knowledge that you earn, that you get from this training that you can't get anywhere else. So every time somebody's like, do you love it? And I'm like, well, I don't necessarily love this grind, but I love what I'm able to do with this, and there's no other way to get it. So of course I'm going to do this. Like, this is what I want to do. And that drives you to the finish line. And if you don't feel that way, that is great to know too. And you will probably get that feeling sometime in your post-bac. And even if you don't, there is time to call it quits. You can get the master's degree and go into industry and go do something else. Like I know we talk about like, you know, there's no leaving a PhD, but that's not true. Like you can decide that it's not for you halfway through, and that's perfectly okay. It's not worth finishing it if you don't love it.
Can I ask you, first, Carol, to talk a little bit about the internship, you know, process that's changed since I went through a number of years ago, but if you could speak to that, and then if other folks could speak a little bit, educate folks about postdocs, that'd be great. But Carol, can we start with you?
Yeah, so the doctoral internship, you can think of it a little bit like residency for clinical psychology PhDs. It's just 1 year, and it's a match system. So you take all of the hours that you accumulated in graduate school of direct supervised patient contact, and during this internship year, you're really trying to see like, okay, like what is the last bit of training clinical training that I need? It's 100% clinically focused. So for someone who does not like clinical work, it's going to be really hard to finish that PhD because internship is over 40 hours a week normally of a lot of intense patient treatment or assessments if you're doing a more assessment focused. So that's like administering like manualized, I don't know how to, it's not really a questionnaire. They're like different tasks, depending on the assessment that you're doing to try to establish diagnosis, or you're doing actual like therapy treatment. So you're like looking to like hone in your skills last minute, and then you're going to apply for a postdoc to get licensed. Some people like manage a little combo where they like apply for internship and there's kind of an expected postdoc at the end of it. So you end up staying 3 years. Requires a little bit of thinking and strategizing, because if you get a postdoc somewhere, that's probably the state you're going to get licensed in. You can't get licensed without doing a postdoc, and I learned that after I got into grad school. And you can't finish your PhD, you don't get your PhD in clinical psychology until you finish internship. So clinical students will defend their dissertation and they will still not be done. They will still not be doctors. They have to finish internship. So you want to go to a program that has a high internship match rate, because it's paramount to you finishing your degree. And I'm very stressed about having to do that next year. Another milestone. I don't know what this is happening, but yeah.
Well, thanks for talking about something that you're finding stressful nowadays, but who would like to talk a little bit about postdocs and what the function might be in other training areas of a postdoc?
So this is sort of like most true in the systems area and very true in the cognitive area. And I think the culture is just spreading across the department where you have to postdoc if you want to be a professor. And you typically have to postdoc for a very long time. It's like extra time to publish more and get grants and, you know, professionalize to become a professor. Each stage is kind of just like a excuse to underpay people to do high skill work, right? Like the grad student does a certain amount of work, but then you get a PhD, but now you're a postdoc, so you make 50 a year or something. And, you know, you can't be a professor until you've done 5 years of a postdoc or something. So what it means is you work in a lab, you probably don't teach unless it's like a teaching postdoc, and it's just kind of academia training. So it's just kind of more, right? Does that sort of jive with other people's experience? Like, I think that's sort of fundamentally what it is. So that's next for, I think, certainly for me. You know, you can change labs, change schools. It's a good opportunity to move. Yeah.
You can postdoc for as long as you want. If you're in clinical, you don't have to postdoc as long, which is another benefit of going through the trouble of getting a clinical degree, because you can always go into clinical work and no longer postdoc. But if you're getting a research, if you're going for a research career, the postdoc's kind of, even in clinical, the postdoc's paramount to making sure that you're developing your CV and developing your line of research in a way that's very deliberate and has like high skill, like demonstrates higher level of research. And so it matters where you publish and like what kind of training grants you're getting. But it's one of those other things in academia where there's not really another way to get to kind of your final position. There are very few ways to get into your goal positions without it. So kind of do what you got to do.
And
Are there students in attendance who are interested in like professional school as well, like MD, PhD, or that sort of thing? Looks like no. I was just curious because we could try to stumble our way through how that works. But if that isn't of interest to this crowd, then that's okay. I think someone had unmuted when I sort of interrupted them. So I want whoever that was to jump in now.
I didn't have a lot to say. I was just gonna agree with what had been said about a postdoc. It kind of is yet another excuse to underpay you for high skilled work. But I think the positive side to it is the people I know who have done postdocs tended to really like it. If you're into research, I think it's a fairly, you don't have any demands on your time. You're just kind of doing your research and you're pretty good at it at that point. So I think it's a nice job if you like that sort of thing. And also, as Carolina was saying, you can be a postdoc for as long as you want, which at least to someone like me is very comforting because I know like it takes a bit of pressure off. Or if my CV isn't quite where I need it to be by the end of grad school, that's okay. I'll just do an extra year of postdoc. So it makes the timeline feel a little bit less threatening to know you have that cushion.
Does anyone know about the times? Because I know, especially in the humanities, like you can only apply for a professor job if your PhD is like a certain number of years old. You sort of like wilt on the vine. Does anyone know if that's true in science? It's not. Okay, no, I'm not sure. Yeah, hopefully you can just keep postdocing until it's time. So that's good for us.
longer you postdoc, like the better. Like that's my understanding.
You sure?
Yeah.
I feel like hiring committees get excited about someone new. You know,
Mm.
just like new and exciting research, and it's
I think it's difficult to say because it's kind of like grad school admissions is one of those things that's kind of fickle. Like it depends on what that particular department is looking for. It depends on like are they ready for a new direction or not? Like who are the people who are doing the hiring? And that's I think a little similar to grad school experience too. I mentor a lot of folks who are trying to get in and are applying or in multiple stages of applying, and I always tell them like write your best application, put your heart and soul into it, but know that at the end of the day, it's going to depend on like who's the faculty member who picks it up and like identifies with what you put down on the page. And do they have the money to take you? Like that is 90% of the admission cycle is do they have money to take you, which is one of the reasons why getting an NSF before grad school is such an edge, because then that professor gets 3 years of free funding and they have 3 years to find funding for you to finish your PhD. And by the time you hit 3 years, you qualify for a lot of dissertation level grants. So it takes that out of the equation. Like you can be a fantastic student, you can be the best candidate possible, and a faculty member can love you. If they don't have a slot to take you, it's just what it is. So there's a lot of it that doesn't depend on your skill level, which absolutely sucks. So just know that if you're applying to grad school, like that's something that's happening. Don't try to read the tea leaves around stuff, because it's do your best and just leave it up to chance. That's the best way I can put it.
I'm so glad you brought up the fact that not everybody is taking a student in any given year. And if you look on the website for PNN in the different training areas, you can see who's taking students. I mean, you can just look at that as an example, the people who are in attendance. I'd advise you to do that, because the first most important thing that you can do is ask, are you taking students next year? And, you know, reaching out to faculty whose work is really exciting to you. So we're coming very close to the end of our time. I'm wondering if anyone in attendance has a question that hasn't been addressed that you really would like to have addressed, or if there's any advice that hasn't been doled out yet by our panel that, you know, you're itching to share with the people in attendance. I think that means that maybe we're done. I mean, am I getting that right?
There's one thing we could address if people are interested in doing a PhD in a different country, because that hasn't come up. I think the rule of thumb is that a non-US PhD makes it very difficult to get an academic job in the US, just because of, I'm not even sure why, but that's just sort of the case. I think you can sort of like launder a DPhil from the UK by doing a postdoc in the US to an extent. But if you're thinking of that you might like to live somewhere that's not in the US, doing grad school in that region or country might be a good way to do it. But unfortunately, it's hard to go and come back. So it's something to think about. If you think you might like to be a professor, that should be something that you keep in mind when you make your list.
I think they also, sorry, I think they also tend to expect more advanced students. Like I definitely noticed that with UK grad schools, is they expect you to like come with a research plan already. They're sort of wanting you to start on year 3, it seems like.
I was going to say, I don't think you can get licensed to practice as a clinical psychologist without a US like trajectory. So like your clinical psych PhD internship postdoc combo, or it's a lot harder. So definitely something to keep in mind. And I don't know if you can practice in other countries with a clinical psychology PhD. Like that'll vary by you know, that country's laws and training requirements for licensure. So like I'm originally from Brazil. I know that with a bachelor's degree in psychology, I can practice there. Not, you can't do that here. So it depends on you. I'd say like definitely study up before you commit. And I don't think we touched on this, but I think it's becoming a little bit easier if you're an international student to do a PhD. Some departments and universities are much more used to it than others, and that I've learned affects a little bit of how willing they are to accept international students. But I think when I applied, there was kind of this like, oh, it's really hard if you're an international student. I think it's a little less difficult now, because there's a lot more information out there for universities to be able to take an international student.
Well, thanks for bringing up that last topic. And thank you, panelists, for being here, giving an hour plus of your time tonight to kind of share information and details about your existence as graduate students. And thanks to everyone who attended. And the hope is that this recording will be posted probably in a week or two, and we can share it a little bit more broadly. But thanks, panelists. Can I ask, is it okay if people in attendance reach out to you if they have follow-up questions? Thanks so much. So everyone have a great night.